Ever get that feeling that the system we're all living in is just fundamentally broken? That there's got to be a better way to do things? Well, today, we're going to dive into a concept called the way. It's a whole framework for living that came out of one writer's really personal search for meaning in a mixed-up world.
So this whole journey kicks off with this pretty powerful admission. The author is basically saying, yeah, you can call me an idealist, I'll own that. But see, that idealism isn't painted as some naive dream. It's the very thing that fueled the entire discovery. It turns the search for a better life from a fantasy into a real, tangible personal quest.
All right, so what's the big problem that would spark such an intense search in the first place? Well, this whole framework is built on the idea that our world is running on a totally broken system.
And this slide really lays out the two sides of the coin, as the author sees it. On one side, you've got the status quo. You're looking at a manipulated monetary system that creates scarcity and what the text calls human enslavement. Then, on the other side, you have the alternative, the kingdom of God. Now hold on, I know that's a huge leap, right? From economics straight into theology. But the key here is to see it through the author's lens. The problem isn't just financial, it's spiritual. It's a clash between the world we have and the world our souls are crying out for.
You know, for years, the author tried to be the one to create change, leading all these movements and projects that just fizzled out. But after hitting a real low point, there was this massive shift in thinking. It went from trying to invent a solution to discovering a path that was already there all along.
And you know what's wild? This big discovery wasn't some new, super complicated ideology. It was actually a return to something fundamental, something this framework calls the way. The definition is incredibly simple: the way of life established by the giver of life. The whole idea here is about following a path that already exists, a natural order, not trying to reinvent the wheel.
Okay, so if the idea is that simple, why isn't everybody just doing it? And that question brings us right to the core paradox of the way, the reason this simple concept is anything but easy to actually live out.
And this, for me, is where it gets really fascinating. The concept itself, not complicated. The instructions aren't locked away in some vault. According to this text, the difficulty is 100% in the doing. It's not a challenge of being smart enough to understand it, but of being willing enough to live it.
So why is it so hard? The author boils it down to these three massive internal roadblocks. First, human pride. You know, that little voice in our head that stops us from being humble enough to try something new. Then there's fear, which keeps us clinging to the broken system we know, even if we hate it. And finally, a lack of faith, which just paralyzes us, making it impossible to take that first step. These things make a simple path feel like a constant uphill battle.
So let's say a person can actually navigate those internal bumps in the road. Then what? How do you actually start walking this path? Where's the starting line?
The answer, according to this framework, isn't some massive top-down revolution, exactly the kind of thing that failed the author before. Nope. Instead, real, profound change begins at the smallest scale possible, the individual. The idea is that any huge transformation is really just a bunch of small individual transformations added together. It all starts with one person.
And here's the cool part. These transformed individuals, they don't just stay on their own. They naturally find each other and form transformed groups. This is how the change scales up, not because it's forced, but because it grows organically from a personal choice into a real community.
So what does one of these first groups actually do? Well, the text gives a pretty clear four-step blueprint. First, you gather humble people who are ready to learn. Remember, that humility is the antidote to the pride we just talked about. Then, they turn that learning into action. They become the caregiver of the needy. And finally, these small groups start to connect with each other, networking to create this incredible web of communities, all built around service. And we'll leave you with this question because it really gets to the absolute heart of the way. In a world that's always looking for the next grand, sweeping solution, this concept offers something radically different. It suggests that maybe the most powerful, lasting change doesn't come from the top down, but from the bottom up, starting with the quiet transformation of a single human heart.